I think you always need a balance of power as a condition for international law and treaties, and this is why the UN system and all of this functioned after World War II. But after the Cold War, I think the challenge for not just international law but for any treaties would be that all states don't constrain themselves, and and there was no constraints on the West, so it was essentially asked to constrain itself. And the relationship, you said, with Russia was largely defined by essentially managing its decline. So the whole concept of a strategic balance, I think, was increasingly just rejected. And as you said, the whole pitch of doing strategic missile defense, um, yeah, giving up on the whole idea of mutually assured destruction, I think I fit nicely into this context, because if you listen to the language back then, uh, actually, a lot of the European leaders in the 90s, when they heard talk of missile defense, they got concerned. They talked about strategic defense. They don't do anymore. Anyways, I think the old treaties, they unraveled, and you would think there's an opportunity now, though, that the world is being rebalanced, that states, they grow some, again, some respect for each other again, the great powers realizing, yeah, mutual security concerns and arms control. But, you really have a huge challenge. You need political giants these days. And it seems we're all cursed with horrible leaders. And of course, the Ukraine war, as you said, complicates things much, much more. But this, you mentioned China, that this is what could make it more complicated to get new treaties in place. And well, Trump expressed this desire for a nuclear disarmament agreement that also includes China. So, you think China could realistically be brought into such a strategic arms framework, or is this out of the question? As you said, the the Chinese wants a separate one from the Russian US one.
Well, I mean, the Chinese have already answered this question. They published a white paper on disarmament policy and arms control back in either November or December of last year. Um, and what they've said is, you know, China's not seeking an arms race. China has a purely, no first use policy, but China has been confronted with the fact that the United States is seeking to develop a nuclear preemptive strike capacity, basically to neuter China and make China helpless in the face of American nuclear supremacy. And so China has reacted to that. The Chinese numbers now are part of a strategic posture that the Chinese are comfortable with. They believe that they can survive an American first strike with sufficient strike capacity to inflict fatal harm on the United States. Therefore, deterrence exists. Um, but what the Chinese don't want to do is play a game where they're drawn into negotiations where, you know, they're going to be factored in with Russia when it comes time for their security. The United States is going to view them as being linked with Russia, and this could create some vulnerabilities for China. So, what the Chinese have said in their paper is what I already said. They said that the United States and Russia need to solve their arms control once they get an agreement, once the numbers are set in a treaty. Then China is willing to step in and say, okay, now how do we do this? But it's not going to be about numbers going up. China is basically going to say, we need all your numbers to come down, because we're all equal here. This is problematic for the United States because we wrongly um, link Russian Chinese nuclear arsenals as if they operate under a joint operational control. They don't. Um, but again, we have people in the United States right now who are sitting in positions that are nominally involved with arms control and this sort of thing, who know nothing about it. These are pure ideologues. They're pure, you know, peace through strength, might makes right kind of thinking, and they're not going to do the right thing. There is a path forward that can be taken that can save the world. You know, you don't need more than 400 nuclear weapons to destroy the world. That's sort of the reality of the situation. Right now we have 1,550. Russia has 1,550. Um, we already have massive overkill. China has 600. We can be very realistic about bringing down the numbers of deployed missiles, except that, at least in the United States, it's attached to a military industrial complex that makes a lot of money off of this. This arms race that we're getting ready to enter into is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar affair that the United States simply can't afford. But we're going to do it because the defense industry is sitting there, cashing checks already. We're going to do it because Congress, gets elected by donations from the companies who are going to benefit from Congress's allocation of money to defense projects related to this new nuclear arms race. It's a vicious circle that Dwight Eisenhower warned us about when he gave his famous, farewell address. Uh, yeah, I guess I'll leave with this. Russia right now outmatches us across the board. They have more modern nuclear weapons across the board than anything we have. Many of our weapons are old and outdated. We don't even know if half these weapons work, which brings up the next problem, which is when we do all of this increase, we're going to be pulling, W-76 and W-82 warheads out of storage and putting them on missiles. But the question is, do they work? I mean, without getting into too much nuclear weapons design, I think the W-76 is a peanut design that, basically, people think in terms of a sphere, the old plutonium device that, World War II. But a peanut device is actually shaped like a peanut. It's two devices, and you'll have one go off, generate a whole bunch of neutrons, and then the second one goes off, feeds off of that, and you get your hydrogen bomb explosion. So you get a conventional atomic bomb explosion, which is fission, then you get fusion, and boom. But to hold those in place, there's a foam. And that foam isn't just foam. That foam is embedded with all the neutron generating stuff. So that when that first thing goes off and the foam disintegrates, it's just throwing out all the things that then are necessary to create the fusion, enhance it, boost it. Boosted nuclear weapon. That's why they call it that. The problem is the foam deteriorates over time. And so now you got these weapons and the foam's there, but they don't know if the foam works. When they tried to refurbish the W-76 a couple, I guess a decade or so ago, they found there is no formula. This was sort of just done by scientists who, figured out, how to do it and maybe handwritten some notes, and they did it. They produced the bombs. And when that's done, they're all dead. They're all senile, drooling in a cup. And nobody knows how to make this foam. And it's a very specific design because you have to boost the weapon in a very precise way. And so they spent a lot of time and effort trying to reverse engineer to try and figure out how to make this foam. They've made something, but they don't know if it works. The weapon's supposed to work as designed. The reason why we have weapons of different megatonnage and all that is, we need a weapon to hit here, compress the ground so we can collapse, silos. In order to do that, we need to boost to, the sufficiency necessary to achieve the result. But if the foam doesn't give you that boost, you get a fizzle. So now we're firing missiles into, Russia expecting to collapse their silos, and we get a poof instead of a boom, and the silos aren't collapsed, and now we got missiles coming back. This is problematic. It means we don't have deterrence anymore because everybody's going to. And so there's a lot of temptation now. This is why heading in the direction we're in is very bad. I believe the Trump administration will probably succumb to pressure to resume underground nuclear weapons testing. And then when that does, the Russians will do the same thing. And then all bets are off. Everybody's going to be doing it. And like I said, we're right back to square one. This is a disaster, an absolute disaster. The American people have been asleep at the wheel. The American press has been asleep at the wheel, but the American press is bought out. This is why you can't trust the New York Times. David Sanger's been, writing for the New York Times for some time, but all he is a stenographer. He gets information from the Pentagon that tells the story they want to tell. He doesn't expose reality. There used to be Seymour Hersh who could write about this stuff, but he's playing the administration game right now, repeating the nonsense. There's nobody in the mainstream that's telling the truth about this. And when people try to tell the truth, the next thing the mainstream will say is, well, the Russians cheat. I'm here to tell you right now, the Russians don't cheat. I mean, Ray McGovern's one of my best friends. I love Ray McGovern. You know Ray, good guy, smart guy. But the other day we were talking, and he said, the Soviets cheated on the ABM treaty, and he cited the Krasnoyarsk radar. And I went, well, time out, time out. They didn't cheat. That radar is incapable of doing the technical functions necessary for the ABM treaty. So it wasn't there was no intention to cheat. To have the intent to cheat, you have to build a radar that's capable of doing the things you're not allowed to do. They positioned the radar because it was a satellite tracking radar, and this was where the gap was in their satellite tracking coverage. It turned out that the positioning of it was in technical violation of the ABM treaty, so the Russians agreed to destroy the radar, and they did. But the Russians don't cheat. I've worked with these people. They are assiduous. What's in the treaty is what they do. I learned that in Vodkinsk because we got shoehorned into building this thing called cargo scan, but it was thrown at the last second, literally days before Reagan and Gorbachev signed the INF treaty. They said, "Oh my God, you got to put inspectors outside of Vodkinsk," and they didn't know how to do it. And so what happened is they put all the onus on the inspectors to write the rule book. And so we're in there trying to do this cargo scan thing, and the Soviets are going, "No, you got to obey everything that was written down. If you're not doing as it was written down, you can't do it." And and then people like Senator Helms said, "The Russians are cheating." Russians don't cheat. Russians don't cheat. The Russians did exactly what they were supposed to do. We're the ones that bend the rules, that play loosey goosey, that cheat, that lie, that manipulate. But people will say, "Well, we can't deal with the Russians because they cheat." I mean, I just attended a meeting with Christopher Ford, a former arms control guy with the first Trump administration. He's the guy that helped kill the INF treaty. And one of his going in philosophies is the Russians cheat. I'm like, well, no, they don't. You cheat. And I can prove you cheat, but you can't prove the Russians cheat. They accuse the Russians of cheating with this 9M729 missile. The Russians said, well, here's the missile. Come on out, send your inspectors in and look at it. And Christopher Ford went, no, we ain't sending inspectors. Why not? Because it'll probably show that they're not cheating. And that's the outcome the Russians want us to see. And I said, well, it's probably because it's the truth. They didn't want the truth. They created a fiction that the Russians are cheating, and they let that fiction ride. How do you do business with people like this? So you're the Russians right now looking at this situation. Russians don't want to have an arms race. First of all, the Russians already won the arms race. Vladimir Putin warned everybody about it in 2016. He warned Bush about it when he withdrew from the ABM treaty. So if you do this, there will be consequences. 2016, he told the American media, there will be consequences. Why aren't you guys writing more about this? They didn't write anything. 2018, he announced that they were building new weapons. And these weapons, the Sarmat, Avangard, and other Poseidon, they're now deployed, operational. Russia outclasses us in every category of nuclear weapons. So this arms race isn't going to be really a race because the Russians are already across the finish line. It's going to be about the United States trying to buy a pair of shoes and tie them at the starting line and see how far we can get. We're so far behind, and we can't afford any of it. We can't afford any of it. The ground launch deterrent system, it's going to, they were talking that it was going to be, initially 75 billion, then they said 120. I will tell you right now, it's going to cost between $1 and $3 trillion by the time it's done. And that's just that. We can't do that. We can't afford that. New submarines, in order to replace the Ohio class submarines, we have to produce submarines at a rate of, I don't know, 2.7 a year. Our maximum output right now is 1.5. We don't have the shipbuilding capacity to do this. The B-21 bomber is just too damn expensive. We can't afford too many of them. And we're going to break free of the security of the New START treaty to engage in an arms race that we've already lost.